A child dies for a few minutes and comes back to life with an impactful message straight from God. What he revealed left even doctors and pastors in shock. In this video, you will learn about one of the most surprising accounts of a near-death experience, NDE, where prayer, faith, and spiritual revelation blend into a testimony that defies human logic and confirms profound truths about heaven, eternity, and the divine plan. Get ready to reflect, get emotional, and strengthen your faith like never before. Jaden, a sweet name, full of innocence, like the very essence of a child who is still discovering the world. 7 years old, curious, spontaneous, and with that look that seems to see beyond visible things. He lives in a small town in the interior of the United States, one of those with quiet streets, trees everywhere, and neighbors who still greet each other with a sincere smile. An only child, Jaden is the center of his parents' lives, a simple couple with firm faith who have always cultivated moments of family prayer, teaching them from an early age that God is present in every detail of life. Since he was little, Jaden demonstrated a sensitivity that attracted attention. While other children were distracted by toys or cartoons, he would ask deep questions. Where do we come from before we were born? What is the sky like? Why did God make the stars? And he often asked. Once, when he saw his mother kneeling in prayer, he approached her and said, "God listens to you even when you just cry inside, right?" That made the mother shiver inside. How could a 7-year-old child have this kind of perception? She always said Jaden was different, not in the way of playing or speaking, but in the way of feeling. Jaden grew up in a home that valued spirituality. Meals always began with a prayer. On Sundays, the family attended the small church in the city, and even at such a young age, he seemed to understand the power of faith. I had a habit of closing my eyes and whispering words of gratitude before going to sleep. Some nights, he said he had dreams about lights and singing voices. His parents interpreted it as a fertile imagination, something common in children, and continued with the routine without paying much attention to these details. But today, all of this seems to have been a warning, a sign that no one knew how to decipher in time. That morning, nothing seemed different. It was a typical Monday. Clear skies, mild temperatures, and Jaden, as always, full of energy. He had just returned from school holidays and was excited to see his classmates again. On the way to school, he talked to his mother in the back seat of the car. He was talking about a drawing that he wanted to show the teacher, a drawing that, according to him, represented the place where prayers go when we talk to God. The mother smiled, finding the way her son expressed his faith charming. I didn't know that would be one of the last times I would hear his voice like that. The journey to school was short, no more than 15 minutes. But along the way, something unexpected happened. An intersection, a signal that didn't work, a driver who advanced without seeing. Everything went quickly, too fast. The impact was strong. The glasses shattered, the sound of brakes, the silence that follows chaos. The stunned mother managed to get out of the car screaming, but Jaden didn't move. He was unconscious, his small body unresponsive, as if time had stopped around him. Help was called immediately. Within minutes, the ambulance arrived and began emergency procedures. The scene was desperate. The mother begged for a miracle, while the paramedics worked around the clock. Jaden was rushed to the nearest hospital. During the journey, vital signs began to fail. The heart monitor fluctuated. Resuscitation attempts intensified. Healthcare professionals knew that every second counted. But for a moment, what was heard was just the continuous high-pitched sound of the machine, a sign that the heart had stopped. The doctor in charge declared a critical condition, cardiorespiratory arrest. For the next 7 minutes, Jaden was clinically lifeless. The medical team didn't give up. They continued to fight amid medicine, chest compressions, and silent prayers. There was something about that child that prevented them from accepting the end. The mother's faith was palpable, and even nurses who had never declared themselves religious began to murmur words of hope, as if they were improvised prayers. Meanwhile, outside the emergency room, Jaden's mother remained kneeling on the hospital floor, hands raised to the sky, eyes wet and voice breaking, saying, "Lord, if there is a purpose, if this boy came from you, don't let him go now. Use him for your glory, but give him back to me." That prayer pierced the room like a cry from the soul. There was no one who passed by and wasn't moved by that woman's cry. It was a raw faith, alive, desperately real. During this time, no signs from inside indicated improvement, but something, somewhere was happening. Something that could not yet be explained. Something that deviated from medical protocols. Because in that moment, when Jaden's eyes were closed and his body seemed lifeless, another journey was beginning. But that, no one knew. Yet, the doctors, after several minutes of no response, began to look at each other, as if they were about to declare the inevitable. But all it took was a second. One more second. One last try. And something changed. The signals are back. Slowly. Weak, but present. A pulse. A breath. Jaden was back. No warning. No explanation. It just came back. And when he opened his eyes, seconds later, the first thing he did was whisper something that no one understood at that moment. A name. A place. A meaningless sentence. But that would later prove to be the key to everything that happened during the 7 minutes he was absent. The doctors were stunned. The recovery was as quick as the accident had been brutal. Jaden was stabilized, but what stood out most was his state of consciousness. He didn't seem confused, not even scared. He stared at the ceiling, as if he was still seeing something that others couldn't see. His mother entered the room, and upon seeing her, he just said, "I saw it, and I have to tell you." But he didn't count. Not yet. He was silent for a while, just observing, as if he was trying to understand where he was, as if he were somehow between two worlds. Being here shows that this message found you on purpose. Sign up and activate the bell to continue on this journey. Leave your like. This is how the light that reached you can now reach many others. Jaden remained silent. His eyes, despite being open, seemed to focus on something that no one else could see. It wasn't confusion. It wasn't fear. It was as if he was observing something far away, or perhaps something too profound to be described with immediate words. Doctors monitored him closely, impressed by the sudden stability of his vital signs. The mother held her hand tightly in silence, with tears streaming down her face, not knowing whether to smile or continue praying. There was gratitude in the air, but also a mystery not yet understood. Something unsaid, something not explained, but it was there, pulsing, and waiting to surface. In the days that followed, Jaden underwent constant medical evaluations. The tests did not indicate any brain damage, which was surprising considering how long he had been without a heartbeat. No signs of deep trauma, no sequels, just a boy who seemed to have crossed something that others couldn't see. And then, spontaneously, he began to speak, not with desperation, not like someone reliving a nightmare, but with the calm of someone who is sure of something bigger. He was sitting on the bed looking at the window when he said, "When everything went dark, I wasn't afraid. It was as if my body was heavy at first, and then it became light, very light. As if I was letting go, floating upwards. I saw everything from afar. I saw my body. I saw my mother crying. I saw the doctors running. But I wasn't there with them anymore. I was outside, above, as if I had come out of Earth's clothes." His description was strangely poetic. Words from a child, but with a spiritual weight that is difficult to ignore. He used expressions such as soft light, invisible wind, and embracing voice. He said he didn't know where he was going, but there was a peace, a lightness, as if he were going home, even though he had never been there before. He said he didn't walk, but was driven. It didn't fly, but it floated effortlessly, as if it were made of something lighter than air. And then everything went white, completely white. A white so intense that it seemed to have sound, smell, even temperature. He said it was like being inside a living cloud. "It was a light that saw me inside," he said, "but she didn't hurt. She cared. She reminded me of things I never experienced, but that I still knew." At this moment, he paused, as if he was trying to find the right word, as if he were translating the unspeakable. The mother just listened without interrupting, holding back crying with each sentence. The father at his side kept his eyes fixed on his son with a mixture of pride, surprise, and reverent fear. Jaden went on to say that in that light there was no time, there was no clock, there was no rush that exists here. There, everything knew who I was, everything knew my name, but not the name you gave me, another name, one that I felt inside. It was difficult to understand what exactly he meant, but what was clear was that he was trying to relate something that went far beyond human language, something that touched the spiritual, the eternal, the invisible. And this, for those who believe in life after death, in profound spiritual experiences, in near-death experiences, or NDEs, is exactly where the divine meets the inexplicable. Jaden talked about a presence. He didn't see it with his eyes, but he felt it. A strong, intense, but loving presence. Like a father, like a mother, like everything at the same time. He said there was no face, no voice like ours, but that he still understood everything. It was as if this presence spoke inside my chest, not in my ears. He didn't know how to explain it, but he said that this presence knew everything about him. Every thought, every doubt, every prayer made in silence. He said he felt completely known, and at the same time completely accepted. One of the details that most impressed the doctors, and which was noted in internal reports, was the precise way in which Jaden described the movement inside the emergency room. He counted in order who was where, which nurse wore purple gloves, which doctor said, "We're going to lose him," and even the position of the cross that had hung discreetly on one of the walls, behind a monitor. There was a cross that no one saw, but I saw it, he said, smiling serenely, like a child who knows a secret too beautiful to keep to himself. During this time, he did not cry. I didn't shake. He spoke like someone telling a good memory, like someone reliving an experience of deep love. But there was in his eyes a certain longing, not from the hospital, not from the accident, but from that white place, of that light, of that presence, that feeling of being finally complete. The mother asked, "Were you dreaming?" And he replied firmly, "If it was a dream, why do I feel so awake until now?" The parents were silent. They knew. They knew that something extraordinary had happened, something that did not fit into diagnoses or clinical examinations, something that touched another dimension, something that faith explained better than science. Jaden didn't use theological words, he didn't quote verses, but everything he said was overflowing with spirituality. It was as if each sentence was loaded with a divine code, a reminder, a warning, a whisper from heaven through the mouth of a 7-year-old child. Little by little, Jaden began to draw. His hands, which previously held common toys, now held pencils with a different intention. He made circles of light, lines that floated. He wrote symbols that he couldn't explain. He said it was not to understand, but to feel. He said that the sky has sounds that turn into images, and that some colors make you caress when you look. Strange words for an adult, but coming from a child who was between two worlds, every sentence felt like a slice of truth. At this point in the story, the curiosity of the people around began to grow. Neighbors wanted to know more. The local church asked to talk to him. A pastor came to visit the family, but Jaden didn't mind that. He just said it wasn't time to tell everything yet. "There are things that need to be kept until people are ready," he said. And he added, "But I can count slowly, if you want to listen." Jaden remained silent that afternoon, sitting on the edge of the hospital bed, his bare feet dangling in the air, as if he were still between two worlds. His eyes stared into emptiness, with an unusual depth for a child. It was as if he was reliving within himself everything he experienced in that brief space where time stopped, where matter lost importance, and where only the spirit continued. His mother, who was watching him from a few steps away, respected this sacred silence. But deep down she wanted to understand what was behind that new look. Jaden seemed more mature, fuller, as someone who discovered something that others have not yet discovered. It was at that moment, without anyone asking anything, that he began to speak, quietly, as if he were talking to someone only he could hear. "I didn't know if it was a dream. It wasn't a place like here. There was no floor, there was no ceiling, but I knew I was somewhere big. I felt a presence, very strong, very close, but I couldn't see it with my eyes." The mother slowly approached, sitting next to him, and asked, "Did you feel scared?" He shook his head gently. "No, I've never felt so much love all at once." Jaden closed his eyes for a few seconds, as if searching for the right words to describe what came next. It was like a voice, but it wasn't sound. It was inside, here, he said, pointing to his chest. It spoke directly to my heart, and it knew me, everything, even what I never told anyone. The mother moved, held his small hand between hers, feeling that something profound was being revealed there. "Did you know it was God?" she asked in a trembling voice. Jaden nodded and replied, "I knew it. It was him. He didn't say, "I'm God," but I knew it. Everyone knows when it's him. There was an unshakable conviction in his words, a certainty that cannot be learned in books, nor taught with words. It was something beyond, something spiritual. And then, he continued, he said that that presence was full of light, but that it wasn't just light, it was understanding. It was like being in front of someone who sees everything and yet loves completely. He said that before him there was no pretense, not afraid, no shame. Everything was seen, and everything was welcomed. In that encounter, Jaden began to hear words. Not long sentences, but short messages, filled with a power he couldn't explain. He said he heard something like, "You need to go back." The mother asked, "Back from where, my son?" And he replied, "From where I was, from a place that isn't here. I wanted to stay, but he said it wasn't time yet, that I had to warn people." The mother swallowed. "Warn what?" And Jaden paused for a long time, looking at his hands, as if he was still listening to that voice. Then he replied simply, that people have forgotten who they are, and they have forgotten who he is. That sentence fell like silent thunder in the room. The mother looked at the father, who had just entered, and they both stood still. Jaden then said, as the voice continued, who spoke with love but also firmly, "Many people are distracted," said the voice. "They're looking down, but they need to look up." And Jaden repeated this as if reciting a truth that cannot be forgotten. He said, "There's something coming, something big, and people need to listen, they need to wake up." The boy didn't know how to give details, but he insisted, "It's not to scare, it's to remember." He said, "God is calling people back, calling by name, whispering in dreams, sending signals, but few are listening. There are people who know that he exists, but live as if he doesn't see, and he sees everything, everything." Jaden said that in that moment, he understood that prayers are not wasted, even those said silently, even those made with tears. He saw something like rivers of light that formed from true prayers. He said that prayer has color, and when it is done with faith, it rises. And get there, where is he? The mother cried softly. The father held back tears. It was hard to believe those words were coming from a child's mouth, but at the same time, impossible to doubt. "He showed me hearts," Jaden said. "Hearts shining and others dark. Said every heart is a light, but many are going out." He looked at his mother and said seriously, "You have light, mother. I saw it." And then he added, "But there are a lot of people who don't even know they have it. They forgot, and he wants me to remind them." Jaden's language was simple but carried a deep spiritual weight. Each word seemed chosen by something greater. He didn't speak in a hurry. He didn't speak like someone who wanted attention. He spoke like someone on a mission. He said that voice didn't scream, but it was impossible to ignore, and every word he heard echoed as truth within him. Truths about love, about choice, about repentance, and about a time that is passing too quickly. At one point he was silent for long seconds. Then he murmured, "He cried." The mother, surprised, asked, "Who cried, son?" And Jaden responded, "God. I felt it. He cried over people, because they're losing themselves. He loves so much, but no one listens." This sentence left everyone without a reaction. The room was silent. The presence of God seemed to take over the environment. It wasn't just a story being told. It was a living revelation pulsing in that boy's every word. Jaden finished by saying that before returning, the voice spoke once again, "Go back and tell them. There's still time." And then everything was calm. He said he felt like he was falling into a cloud. And then he opened his eyes in the hospital, but a part of him still felt that presence, as if God was somehow coming along with him. Getting here was not by chance. When a message touches your soul, it's because something inside you was ready to hear it. Write in the comments, "Speak to me, Lord," is more than a phrase. It is an act of faith, a step towards the presence of God. And when you write, others wake up too. Because when God speaks to one, he reaches many. Because what Jaden began to see after that, he went far beyond human understanding. The hospital room still seemed to be engulfed in dense silence. Jaden's last words about that voice that spoke straight to the heart, that knew everything and yet loved everything, left his mother in tears and his father visibly shaken. It wasn't just as if the son had come back from the dead. It was as if he had crossed something that cannot be explained, and came back carrying fragments of a place that human eyes cannot see. But before all this happened, there was a moment, an instant, that second when everything seemed lost, The doctors had already done everything they could. Cardiorespiratory arrest extended beyond the time considered safe. There was no longer any neurological response, no sign of recovery. Jaden's eyes were closed, his body was inert. The devices were emitting constant, discouraging sounds. One of the doctors, already with an expression of resignation, exchanged glances with the team and, in a low voice, murmured, "Let's close." It was a dark, silent moment when pain began to settle in the hearts of those who loved Jaden. The mother, kneeling in a corner of the hospital, repeated only one thing: "Lord, there is still time. If it is your will, return him to us." She didn't scream. He just whispered through tears. And it seemed that, in that moment of raw faith, devoid of any vanity, an invisible door was opened. Because it was exactly at that second, at the exact moment when earthly hope was about to be extinguished, that something happened. One of the monitors, previously static, beeped faintly. Small, but present. The professional's eyes widened. One of the doctors immediately shouted, "There's a pulse. It's coming back." The chaos of the attempt gave way to an organized race. New doses, new stimuli, oxygen. And then Jaden took a breath. A weak murmur at first, but real. Then another, and one more, until, as if awakened from a sleep that spanned dimensions, Jaden opened his eyes. The mother, upon seeing this, fell to the floor in tears, covering her face with her hands. It was a cry that mixed relief, amazement, faith, and reverence. The father couldn't move. He remained motionless, staring at his son as if he were seeing a miracle happen before his own eyes, without filters, without explanations, without a doubt. Jaden blinked a few times, as if adjusting to the hospital light. His eyes seemed clearer. More gifts. He looked around slowly without rushing, as if he was trying to recognize the world he had returned to. His mother approached him slowly, touching his hand, and he, without much strength yet, said, "I saw God." It wasn't a loose sentence. It was a statement loaded with something greater. The room, which had previously vibrated with the adrenaline of the rescue, fell into absolute silence. A silence full of questions, full of fear, full of reverence. Jaden continued to stare at a spot on the ceiling and added, "He sent a message." Nobody knew what to answer. Doctors exchanged looks, surprised. The nearest nurse, known for being skeptical, put her hand over her mouth to contain the impact. What that boy had just said touched something that no medicine could reach. The following hours were of stabilization. Jaden was lucid, but still weak. The medical team was attentive, but silent, respecting that moment that had already surpassed the limits of science. And when his parents asked what he meant by message, he just smiled and said, "I'll tell you later. It's not all at once." But what struck me most at that moment weren't just the words. That's what he began to describe in detail that no one had ever told. He said that during the time he was out of body, he saw a nurse drop a small silver crucifix while changing ventilator tubes. Said he fell under a closet. The nurse, upon hearing this, left the room in shock and returned minutes later, holding the small pendant. She didn't know how to explain it. She said that no one had seen her when she lost the object, and only now, after listening to Jaden, had I gone looking. And he was exactly where he said he would be. Jaden also described the exact moment a doctor raised his voice and said, "We lost him." He repeated the words with the same intonation. The doctor, pale, confirmed, and he also said that there was no way he could have heard that, since at that time, theoretically, there was not enough brain activity, but Jaden listened, not with the ears, but with something beyond. Later, when he was recovering, he said he heard his mother praying, word for word. He described the way she was kneeling with her hands over her face, saying, "Sir, if he has to go, let me hear his voice first." That left the mother without reaction. She had never told anyone that prayer. It was something she murmured to God between tears, something said in the despair of the heart. But Jaden listened. These details began to multiply, small fragments of a parallel reality, words spoken in silence, intimate thoughts, emotions that could only be captured by someone who was on another level. And Jaden apparently was there. The family was instructed to keep him under observation, but doctors recognized that what they were witnessing was rare, almost inexplicable. One of the experienced doctors even said, clinically and neurologically, he came back, but spiritually, he never left. The phrase stayed in the mother's mind throughout the day. And as she watched her son with his eyes fixed on the sky that appeared through the bedroom window, she felt the same thing. Jaden returned to the arms of his family, but something about him carried a weight of eternity, a piece of heaven, a trace of glory. And everything he had said up until that moment was just the beginning. And what Jaden revealed in the following days was beyond anything anyone could have imagined. Jaden wasn't the same anymore. Something deep and silent had transformed within him. Since that moment he came back to life. It wasn't just a biological return. It wasn't just the miracle of a heart that started beating again. It was as if he had been reborn with a different perspective, with a perception beyond his years, with a type of consciousness that cannot be explained by earthly experiences. The doctors themselves, when observing him in the following days, commented among themselves that he demonstrated an unusual calmness, a lucidity rare even for adults. And the parents felt that. They felt it with every gesture, with every look, with every sentence that came out of that boy's mouth. For the first few days, Jaden spent more time in silence than usual. It wasn't the silence of someone who is sad or confused. It was a deep, serene silence, like someone listening to things that cannot be said in words. When he spoke, his sentences did not sound like that of an ordinary child. "Mommy," he said one morning, "there are people who walk with their eyes open, but their hearts asleep." The mother froze. How could a 7-year-old formulate something like that? He asked where he had heard that from, and he just replied, "I felt it. God showed it." These lines began to be repeated. In common moments of the day, like looking out the window or seeing a flower in the garden, Jaden would say phrases like, "That color is similar to that light," or "The flowers know that he exists, even without speaking." The words came out as if they were being breathed from a secret place within him. And the most surprising thing, he began to describe images, places, sensations, and symbols that he had never learned or heard about. Not at school, not at church, not even at home. Parents started writing everything down. One afternoon, during a conversation with his father, Jaden mentioned something that shocked him. "Daddy, why does that lady in the living room window always cry when she looks at you?" The father turned pale. There was no one visible there. But days later, he told his wife that years ago, when he was young, he lost his mother in that same room, and that he always felt her presence there, especially when he was alone. Jaden didn't know that. It was never told. And yet he knew. He said the lady at the window was wearing a blue scarf and was holding something in her hands. The father burst into tears. It was exactly her favorite scarf. And it wasn't just that. Jaden began to recognize intentions in others. I could tell when someone was sad, even when they were smiling. I felt when someone needed to hear a word of comfort. And the most impressive thing, when he placed his hands on people's chests, he said that their light was dim or that there was shadow inside. It was as if he saw the spiritual, as if he saw what the eyes don't see. And it wasn't forced. He didn't seek attention. He didn't want to impress, just talked. Over time, he began to pray differently. The once repetitive prayers before bed were now deep, spontaneous. He asked for specific people that his parents didn't even know. "Lord, take care of that girl in the white dress who is afraid of falling in the dark." Or, "Jesus, help the man who thinks he is alone, but he is not." Parents began writing down these prayers. Days later, when they talked to some neighbors and church members, they discovered stories eerily similar to what Jaden had prayed for. People who were experiencing crises, depression, suicidal thoughts, and who dressed exactly as he had described, even though he had never seen them. These coincidences began to seem anything but coincidental. The church pastor was called to talk to the family. When he arrived, Jaden looked at him and said, "You've ever felt God hug you when you thought about giving up, right?" The pastor was paralyzed. "I had gone through a silent crisis of faith weeks before, alone in the church office, and I had prayed exactly like this. Lord, if you love me, hug me, because today I am giving up." Jaden also started drawing more often. But the drawings were not childish, they were symbolic. They represented doors, stairs, spirals, eyes, wings, and lights. When asked what it all meant, he just replied, "These are things we remember when we come back." And he said it simply, as if explaining a joke. One of the things he repeated most was, "Everything that is true shines, and everything that deceives darkens." These phrases began to spread among friends and family, like little lessons of wisdom. Many started to write it down, others sharing in prayer groups. And more people started looking for the family, wanting to hear the boy talk. But Jaden didn't talk to everyone. He said he could only talk to those who were ready to listen. And sometimes, even when faced with direct questions, he would just smile and say, "Not now," as if he knew the time for everything, as if he had returned not only with memories, but with a spiritual awareness that guided what should or should not be said. Another notable change was the way he reacted to emotions. When someone was angry, he would say, "Don't lend your light to that." When someone cried, he would say, "You're getting lighter. Crying is washing your insides." And when they asked what he meant by all that, he just replied, "I'm just remembering what he told me." And he never said God in a generic way, always with respect, with reverence. As if he knew exactly who he was talking about. One morning, watching bad news on television, Jaden asked them to turn it off. He said that bad words cast a shadow on the house. Since then, parents have started to limit content at home, guided by their child's perception, and they noticed that the atmosphere became lighter, calmer, more spiritual. Even the fights that used to happen over small things have diminished. There was a different atmosphere, as if Jaden had become a point of light within his own family. And what Jaden shared in the days that followed continues to make us reflect to this day. Jaden now spent more time in silence, observing, feeling, noticing things that most people simply ignore. He no longer spoke on impulse. When he said something, it was as if each word carried a weight, an intention, a meaning that went beyond the literal. And this began to influence everything around him. The atmosphere at home, the way his parents communicated, even the routine of neighbors and acquaintances. Everyone was paying more attention, not just on Jaden, but on themselves. It was as if that child had placed an invisible mirror in front of each one, forcing them to look deeper. And maybe now is the time for you to look too, not towards Jaden, but within you. Have you ever stopped to think about the times when something very strong tried to get your attention, but you ignored it? A dream that seemed more real than all the others, a thought that came suddenly and moved you, a feeling that didn't make sense, but stopped you from going somewhere, and then you discovered that something serious happened there, that kind of thing you feel and can't explain. How many times, without realizing it, could you have been touched by something divine? How many times may God have tried to speak to you, but the noise of life was louder? Maybe you're watching this video right now and thinking, "That's just a boy's story." I say, but is it really? Or is this story a reflection of yours? Is Jaden saying in childish words what his adult heart has felt but never had the courage to admit? What if deep down you also know that there is something beyond, something greater, something spiritual that insists on reminding you that heaven is not that far away? Maybe you've never had a near-death experience. Maybe it never left your body or floated toward the light. But that doesn't mean you never felt God, which was never played in a subtle but accurate way, in a moment of pain, in a prayer whispered in the dark, in a lonely tear on the pillow, in a praise that made you shiver for no reason. How many times has the presence of God surrounded you? But have you been distracted by the pressures of the day, by the bills, by the rush, by the distractions? Now stop for a second and really listen. What if this story you just followed is the way God chose to remind you that He is still there, that He never stopped talking, that He still sends messages? And often, the most profound messages come from those we least expect. Jaden is just a kid, but perhaps that's precisely why he was chosen. Because Jesus said that you have to be like a child to enter the kingdom of heaven. Because a child doesn't judge, doesn't pretend, doesn't control. She feels, she believes, she delivers. And perhaps in this world full of skepticism and noise, it is the pure heart of a child that can still clearly hear the voice of the Creator. And you? Are you listening? Are you ready to hear what God has been trying to say for so long? Have you been paying attention to the signs, in whispers, to the gentle pushes that take you off the wrong path? Or could it be that, like so many, you were moving away, getting used to the silence, believing that God had stopped speaking? The truth is that He never stopped. But maybe you stopped listening. This story was not told just to thrill. She is a mirror, an invitation, a spiritual provocation. It's for you who wonder if it's still worth believing. It's for you who once had faith but grew cold. It's for those of you who have never had it, but feel like there's something different happening in there now. Something that you can't explain but that you feel, that tightens your chest, that makes you breathe deeper, that reminds you of moments when everything seemed clearer, simpler, more connected with the sky. This story is a reminder that there is still time, that you can still go back, That it is still possible to reconnect with the light, with faith, with purpose, and it doesn't matter how far you moved away. He keeps talking, he keeps calling, and sometimes he uses the unlikely, a child, a video, a stranger, to say, "I'm still here." So now I want to ask you a sincere question. Have you ever experienced anything similar to what Jaden experienced? Maybe not with as much intensity, but with the same essence. A moment when you clearly felt you were not alone. An experience that left an impression on you, that remained with you but that you never had the courage to tell anyone about. Or perhaps a prayer that was answered so precisely, so out of the ordinary, that you could only attribute it to God. If you've ever experienced something like this, or if you feel like you're living it now, write it here in the comments. I have heard the voice of God. It may seem simple, but this gesture has power. It turns that conversation into a community. It shows that you are here, that you are attentive, that you are willing to listen again. If at any point in this story you felt that God spoke to you, then don't ignore it. Don't treat it as a coincidence. If this message touched something inside, it's because maybe heaven is trying to reach you in a way that you understand, that you feel, that you live. So, if you heard the voice of God in this video, subscribe to the channel now and leave your like. Here, you will find more than stories. You will find signs. You will find answers. You will encounter the presence of a God who still speaks and who wants to remind you that life does not end here. This story was just the beginning. The next video on your screen holds something that can speak directly to you. Many who watch it say they never see life the same way again. Click now and continue this journey. It might be exactly the message your heart needed to hear today. God is still speaking, and sometimes the next word changes everything.